In this video, I'm going to introduce you to SPSS statistical analysis software, and we'll look at how to import an Excel file, how to tell your data and your output windows apart. We'll look at variable view and data view, and we'll look at things like making a frequency table, making a histogram, manipulating some items in that histogram, and getting descriptive statistics and z-scores. So when I first open up SPSS, I have something that looks like this, and actually it's showing me variable view at the moment, so we'll look at that in a moment. But I have this little pop-up over here, and this just allows me to open up a new data set or open up some recent files, for instance. I'm just going to close this and show you how to get there from this window itself. And so here I'm looking at data view, and this just looks like a spreadsheet, basically. That's really all this is. If I wanted to open up an SPSS file, I could go to Open, and I can go to Data if I'm looking for to open up a data file that I already have saved. I could go to Output if I already have results that I want to view in an output file. And I can also, though, import data from another file type. So for instance, a CSV file or an Excel file. And for this, I actually have an Excel file, so I'm going to click Excel. It's important to make sure that I'm looking in the correct folder. So this is the folder that I want to be looking in, so I can double check that if I need to adjust which folder it's looking in. It's also important that I'm looking for files of the correct type. So if this is looking for CSV files, for instance, it's not going to find any in this folder. I have to make sure that it's set to the file type that I want. And this isn't a very descriptive name, but this is kind of the default name here, but I know that the file that I'm looking for is book 1. So I'm going to select that and click Open. When we first go to read the Excel file, it gives us this little pop-up here, and this is really important, making sure that these values are correct. Usually the default is just fine, but importantly, it's going to make sure that it's pulling the data from the correct worksheet in Excel. Particularly, that's important if you have multiple sheets in that file. In this case, we just have one, so we're all set there. And the other really important thing here is to make sure that this box is checked if you have variable names as your first row of data. So for instance, we get a little preview down here. If the first row of our Excel file is the names of our columns, then we want to make sure this is checked. If it's unchecked, we can see that our first row of data here is going to be our column names, and that's not what we want. So we want to make sure that's checked if that's the case, that we have those column names already in there. And I can click OK. And so that just brought me opened up a second window here, actually. And so I'm going to pull that up for us, if it'll let me here. And so we have two windows now. We have our SPSS window, our data window, and we also have our output window. I'm going to try to make these take up a little bit, kind of equal space here, more or less. And so the difference here is our data window is going to be the window with our data in it. It's the one that looks like a spreadsheet if we're in data view. And our output file here is going to be where our results go. And so it's going to be important to know which window that I'm in at any given time, so I know what I'm looking for and I'm in the right place when I'm trying to do things. So it's going to be helpful to familiarize yourself with the data window and the output window. The output window also gives us a little summary of what we've done, which is really helpful. So for instance, here we imported this file, so we have get data type XLSX, which is the file extension. And we also have where that file came from. And so that's really, really helpful information if, for instance, I open up this output file and maybe I didn't record this somewhere else in the file name or somewhere else within the file, I have information about what data set this output goes with. And so if I come back here to my data window, this is data view. So if you're looking at your data in your data window, you're in data view. I can also go to variable view here. And so this is going to give me some information about each of my variables. I can edit the name in here if I wanted to be more descriptive. So POV here is point of view. So I could do this. SPSS, as you can see, does not like spaces in the variable names, but I can get around that if I want by not putting spaces in or putting in underscore. I'm just going to skip the spaces here to put in point of view that way. And so I can type in these areas to add another variable if I have another one that for some reason wasn't in my file, or if I'm just entering this data by hand for some reason. The second thing here is to look at what kind of variable type it is. Most of our variables are going to be numeric. There might be some times where we have a string. A string is just text. So if we had, for instance, if people were responding in words, or if we had stimuli that were words, that might be a string variable. We also have other options here like date, dollar, scientific notation, but we're just going to keep this as numeric. The width here is just the width of the columns, how many spaces it's allowing here when we go back to our data view. And decimals is how many decimal places it's giving to things. So for most of these variables, we really don't need decimal places. For timing, we do. We want to keep that out to 2 decimal places. And the other thing I just want to draw your attention to here is in the measure column. And so this is getting back to those scales of measurement that we've talked about. And so here we have the option for nominal, ordinal, or scale, which would be something like interval or ratio. So you want to make sure those are correct. So for instance, age would be a scale variable. That's correct. Point of view and sentence type are nominal here, and that's correct. Timing is scale. Rating, that maybe is a little bit debatable. We're going to use this as a scale variable. So I'm going to just correct that. SPSS will usually automatically assign these, but I like to make sure that they're correct, and it's a good idea to do that. All right, so that's our variable view and data view in our data window. And before I do anything else even, I really want to make sure that I'm saving my file here. And that's just going to make sure that if for some reason SPSS crashes on me or something happens, that I have this file saved. And so I really encourage you to save your data file and your output file early and save frequently as you make changes. And so for instance, here I'm going to give this a more descriptive title here. And so I'm going to maybe remind myself that this is the point of view and sentence study. Data here. And you'll notice this is saving as a .sav file. That's how the data files save for SPSS. So I can click save, and I can see that that's now how that looks up there. I'm going to do the same thing, save my output file. And I'm going to save it the same way, POV and sentence type data. But this is going to save instead as an SPV file, and that's what the output looks like. And I'm going to actually change this to output to remind myself of what I'm looking at and save. All right, so next up, we're going to start visualizing our data. And so we've talked about the importance of visualizing our data in other videos. Feel free to check those out if you haven't already. And so in order to do this, for the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get a frequency table. And so I'm going to go to Analyze, Descriptive Statistics. I'm going to go to Frequencies. And we'll see that this little box pops up. And so I have some options here, and I can basically, I'm going to click on whichever variable I want, and then use the arrow key to bring it over into the variable box. And so for this, I'm going to get a frequency table for rating. And I'm going to click OK. And we can see now my output pops up here. And I can see, again, the data set that I used. It gives me the N, how many scores that I have in this case. And this is correct. I have scores for rating here for all 12 of our participants, 1 through 12, we can see right over here. And this is giving me 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. These are the possible scores from the rating of 1 to 5. We have at least one of each of these scores, and I can see the frequency here, the percent, the cumulative percent. One thing to be aware of, so if I get, for instance, a descriptive statistics frequencies, If I can change this out just by clicking, and it'll give me the arrow going back the other way. So I can take rating out and put age in. If I click OK again, we're going to see the possible the ages here and the frequency table. And something to note is that we've talked about frequency tables as we're going to use all possible values. SPSS doesn't necessarily know what all possible values are in this case, since we only have the values that are there. And so it's only using those. So you can see 21, 22. Our range here looks like it's going from 21 to 36, but we have 21, 22. We're skipping 23 here because there isn't one. If we're making a frequency table by hand, we wouldn't do it this way, but SPSS is going to do it this way, and that's all right. And again, we can see our frequency here. So for instance, we see 3 people were 28 years old, percent of 25% of the sample, 25% of 12 being the total. And again, our cumulative percents and so on. And so that's how to make a frequency table. I'm going to notice over here, I haven't done anything to change my data file, but I have more information now here in my output file. And I can tell that I haven't saved all that information because I can see that little asterisk that's right up next to the title of my file. So I'm just going to hit that save button, and you can see that that goes away. And so that's how I know that it's saved. So next up, let's make a histogram. And so age I was just looking at to kind of get a sense of the age. I'm not really interested in that, but I do want to make a histogram of rating. So I'm going to go to graphs here. And it may be tempted when you're making a chart of some sort to go to chart builder, but we're going to go to legacy dialogues. And that's really always what we're going to be using when we want to make some kind of a visualization, whether it's a histogram, a bar graph, a scatter plot. And so we can see that we have these different options here. We have bar graphs, line graphs, pie charts, all of these things. And so we're going to use a histogram for this. And so just like before, I'm just going to click on what I want. And in this case, the only thing I need to fill in here is variable. And so I'm going to put rating into that variable box and click OK. And again, always that information is going right into my output file. And so I can look at this histogram. And again, from our histogram, we get all this information. I can tell the shape of the distribution. I can tell what the mode is. I can see how many people have each of these scores. So lots of good information here. And we can also see some additional information SPSS is giving us on the side here. And so I want to show you a couple of things here. If I click on my histogram, I can edit this actually. And so I can, for instance, edit the color. So if I go to properties will come up here, I can go to fill in border. And I can pick another color if I want and say apply, say OK there. And I have a new color. I can close that. If I wanted to, I can manipulate the color of the text. I can manipulate the font and all of that. So you can see that here. I don't actually want to do this, but I do want to maybe just change the title here and make this a little bit more descriptive. So for instance, I can say sentence rating if this study does appear to be about sentences, language stimuli, and all of that. So people are rating sentences here, and so I can change that, hit enter, and I've updated my title for my axis label here. And I could also insert a title. You see we have that option right here. And so I could say this is frequency of sentence. If I just X out of here, it's going to save those changes automatically in my output file. But remember that we do want to save the file so that even though it's in the output file, we want to remember to see it frequently. And so here I've changed the color, I've edited the axis label, and I've added a title. And so we have these different things that we can do to make our graphs a little bit better, a little bit more informative, and also make this really however we want to color that in, personalize that however is informative and helpful. So one other thing that is useful to know about SPSS is that I can also insert here text or a title of some sort. So I can click new text here. And it's going to bring me at the little text box right below here. And I can take notes to myself as I'm doing this. And so, for instance, I can write down that I am having we have a negatively skewed graph here. So things are negatively skewed. And I could give us some additional information. So the mode equals 4, because we can see that that's the highest bar here. And so again, I can save that if I want. You don't have to save quite that frequently, but like to be in that, build that habit. So what else can we do? So let's get some descriptive statistics here. And so to do this, we could maybe do this over here. I prefer to always go back to my data file in order to run any kind of analysis. And really that's just because if I'm in a situation where maybe I have more than one SPSS data file open, I want to make sure that it's running the analysis related to the data set that I want to be running that analysis for. And so I can go to Analyze, Descriptive Statistics again, and this time I'm going to go to Descriptives. And we see it brings up this little box. And I can pick which variables I want to get descriptive statistics for. And so, for instance, I'm going to get things like maybe mean, standard deviation, variance, things like that. And so I'm going to just pick my numeric variables here. So age, timing, and rating. Bring those over. I'm going to go to options 2 here. And this is going to give you the option to pick what kinds of stats you want. So here we can see we're automatically getting the mean, standard deviation, minimum, maximum. And I could throw in if that I want the variance there as well. So making sure that box is checked off. If I want that variance, I'm going to say continue and OK. And we can see again this output, this pops up in our output window. And so it always gives us our n. And again, here we asked for minimum, maximum, mean, standard deviation, and also gave us that variance because we checked that box. So we have this information now. Now, this is how we get descriptive statistics. And again, we're always going to, whenever we're analyzing our data, we want to visualize our data first, get those descriptive statistics before you move on to anything else. And so far, this is really all we've talked about, but as we continue on in this course, as we continue getting different kinds of analyses, we always want to do this first still. Last but not least, though, we've also talked about z-scores. And so I want to show you how to get z-scores in SPSS, which is super quick and easy. So actually, if I go to Analyze, if I go back to Descriptive Statistics Descriptives, we'll see that I missed this one little box over here and didn't pay any attention to it. But this says if we click this box, it's going to save standardized values as variables. And so if I click OK, we see, OK, I got this descriptive statistics again down here because I did it twice. But if we go back to our data file, we're actually going to see that we have 3 new variables here, z age, z timing, and z rating. And so for each of these variables, the z indicates that these are z-scores. Z age is going to be the z-score for age, obviously, z timing, z rating, rating. And so now we have these z-scores. And so if those were useful, if those were something that I wanted to be analyzing, be calculating as part of this data analysis process, I have those, I have 36 z-scores here in seconds, and I'm going to save that since I now have made some kind of an edit to my data file. All right, so last but not least, since we have our descriptive statistics, I'm going to add in some new text again. Again, this can be a title, it can be a text, doesn't matter. The titles will just be a little more bold here. But so I can give some information here and just start to kind of write this up for myself. And so I have that when I go to, for instance, write my results section with my final results for this study. And so, for instance, I can say participants had a mean age of 27.25, SD equals 4.39, rounding to 2 decimal places there. I could also say something like ratings ranged from 1 to 5, mean equals 3.58, SD equals 1.24. And either of these are fine ways to talk about my descriptive statistics, are fine ways of writing that up. Typically, we're going to, I can do this in here. I'm going to italicize those statistical symbols for mean and standard deviation, and then save this one more time, and I am all set.